How's everybody? Good. Good. Okay, so I say we should start, and then if other people join, I will add them. But I want to first introduce our wonderful speaker that we have today, Gwen. And Gwen, I'm going to give you the floor so you can tell us a little bit about your background and how
Sure.
you built your career path. And then we're going to get started with our questions. Just as everybody knows, this is an initiative that She's Independent and your cohort is doing every month to really bring subjects that matter to founders and really be able to provide them insight into some of these areas that sometimes they find challenges in. So thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. And I actually am excited to hear all about your experience and how we tackle this.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Just as a way of background, I am 24 years. This is my 24th year in healthcare and specifically life sciences. I started my career at big pharma, but really quickly transitioned to startup and mid-sized pharma. So I've really found my home in the smaller companies and where we've been able to build from scratch and sort of create value and build businesses. My experiences is probably half my years I've spent in sales and sales leadership, and the other half I've spent in business analytics and operations. And so what that means is that I have lots of experience around just building from scratch for commercial readiness, building, understanding, building decision support functions, commercial optimization functions, and all the operational support. So all the stuff as you're thinking about building an organization that you would need to ensure that people are able to be effective, meaning the CRM, incentive compensation, data management, learning and development, commercial excellence type work. Everything that needs to be tracked and measured is stuff that, my groups have owned. And so we really think about how do you launch into markets and how do you optimize and get the most out of whatever you're launching into the market. Lots of experience as well in market research, insights, go-to-market, deployment, and ROI of resources. So I'm everything but marketing. So anything that you're putting enablement around your commercial team is stuff that I've owned. I'm very data driven. I've owned data functions for the last many years. And so we'll come back to this as we talk through some of the questions that come up today, because I think the most important resource that we have for answering the questions that we have as founders and business leaders is data. Data is, I think, the key source to help inform and sort of shape where we go with our business. So that's me in a nutshell, and happy to help in any way that I can and look forward to having a conversation here. And I do invite it to be a conversation. So if people have questions on what I'm saying, let's just talk back and forth a little bit.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to get it kick-started. And with that, I will start with the first question. And I think, by the way, I love the fact that you brought up data as being your supportive main supportive factor, because a lot of people sometimes bring in their opinion rather than the data to back it, and that creates a lot of delays and challenges in making the right decisions or driving the right strategy. So I love that. So in your years of experience, what are some of those tendencies, whether good or bad, that you see happen over and over when it comes to sales teams?
Yeah. Really good question. I would say the first one is, salespeople are a certain kind of people in general, and I would say they tend to be short-term focused. And I think that's good and bad. So I think that it depends where your business is, right? So if you're brand new and you've got to have quick uptake, having that short-term focus is really good. But if you're thinking about how do I equally build a business, having a team that's very short-term focused can be concerning, because then no one's looking forward. So you've either got to fix for that in your infrastructure and sort of the team that you deploy, or I've always found that the biggest way to influence the short-term view of a sales team is through the incentive compensation setup, which we can talk a little bit more about here. But I think that short-term focus is great for immediate, but when you're trying to run the long haul, oftentimes with building businesses, it's a marathon and not a race. You've got to at least have somebody that's looking a little bit more into the midterm and the longer term. And so I think that's one good and bad thing that's pretty consistent is the short-term view. They're trying to get to the next bonus check, whatever, if it's the quarter or the half or the year, that's the view of the sales team.
Got it.
Yeah. I would say another thing is, salespeople tend to be, again, it's a personality thing. And I say this as a former salesperson myself. We're very much tell and talk, right? And so I think there's always an opportunity to be thinking about sell versus tell. Salespeople don't tend to ask enough questions, right? So everything needs to be customized and tailored to the need on the other side of the sales transaction. But we tend to talk so much and want to tell so much that there's oftentimes an opportunity to leverage the L&D function, the learning and development function, to really get people to slow down and think about the understanding the customer piece as opposed to just telling. So I think that's pretty consistent. And I spent a few years as an L&D leader, and we spent a lot of time really trying to kind of make that minor tweak in the salespeople on our teams.
Got it.
What'd you say?
No, I think that's very true about especially the waiting to get that next check and then not thinking, just really focus on that piece rather than thinking on both the medium term and the long term.
Yeah. So I think as the business owner or the founder, that's obviously your responsibility. You're definitely thinking long term. But I think you have to think about, how do I set up either my infrastructure, meaning how I deploy my resources. Maybe there's people that are short term and then people that are long term, or how do I set up their incentive compensation to motivate them on both ends of that, right? So it could be, and I'll give you in my world, let's say if it was prescriptions, if you're paying people on new prescriptions only, they're going to only want new scripts. If you're paying them on new prescriptions and refills, you're going to have them more connected to telling the story, keeping people on your product, right? Or support, helping that you give the tools to the office to help patients maintain, right? So it's how you pay them influences what message how they're messaging to customers and what they focus on, as an example.
Got it. No, and I know we're going to touch on one of those factors, just compensation, a little later. And I think that definitely is key to how to keep the team engaged. So I'm gonna let that question and comment as we continue to progress. And I guess in your opinion, what should be the sales structure of? I'm thinking early stage company, but let's even talk about like when you're building out your initial sales team. What do you think should be the structure? Because we know we have marketing plays a role in it. Then you have sales. BD or even client success, you have different roles. So I'm just thinking about what is the ideal structure that is scalable, that you can take from an initial and then grow it, and it has a very cohesive growth.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you may not like my answer because I don't think there's an ideal structure. I think that people have to start with what is their business. And what are the goals of their business in the next 12 to 24 months? And so then they have to ask themselves, then what does my business need, and who and what will that take to get there, right? And so I think the way that, one person answers that is going to be different than the way another person answers it, because their business needs are different. I think something that people can do is they can look at businesses that are sort of in the same space as theirs and look at how they're doing and have conversations with those founders on what's working and what's not. I think you can look for like benchmarks. I mean, even, if you're involved in founder groups, understanding, structure and infrastructure at different companies, just looking at that and considering how people are doing it. I think, first of all, if you do that, you're going to see everyone set up different. There's not a right way. I have never, out of all the organizations that I've worked at, but it's all different. There's not one way. So I think it all goes back to what do you need and who is it going to take, right? Meaning even on this senior management team, I was looking recently, I was having a conversation with someone that needed a CCO, and they have, like, as an example, a chief revenue officer. You look at some companies, they'll have a VP of sales. You look at some companies, they'll have a go-to-market. Some companies could put all that under one umbrella. So I think it's where are you in your life cycle? How many hats does a person need to be wearing, right? Because when you're early, it might be that one person's doing all that. And as you grow, it might be that as you scale, you can break that up, and you can have a chief revenue officer and a chief commercial officer and blah, 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 so they start breaking up the job. So I think it depends on what's your funding allow? How many hats do people need to wear? And what do you have to get done right now versus what can wait till later and be split out? So I think these are questions someone has to have some introspect on, as opposed to thinking, if I tell you this is the way to do it, I'm telling you one way, because your businesses are like snowflakes, right? And they're very individual, and they're unique. So I'm not sure if I think even with sales, I think it's I think it varies as well. So if you think about just down a level in the sales structure, it depends on what are the sales needs, right? So I can tell you, I was in a business during COVID where we had a deployment of a sales organization that was all very short-term based, but COVID changed sort of the dynamics of what we were selling into. And then all of a sudden, part of our business started to fall off, and we had to change the structure so that we had people deployed differently in order to fill what I'm going to call a leaky bucket. So there ended up being we had salespeople that were driving sales up, and then we were losing sales. Retention was lower than we expected. And so then we had to hurry up and put another team in place to be the people to drive retention, right? So I think the circumstances drive what's the right structure. I have spent many years in sales operations. I just like Alex on, with your team, with your cohort, like there's people that just do sales operations as their expertise. Sales operations people are excellent to say, help me think, here's my business needs. What's the right structure, knowing that here's what I need to accomplish in the next 12 months, 24 months. That's what I would do, that's what we do is we sit down with the sales operations function and strategically think about what and who do we have to have right now, and how might that evolve 12 months later if X scenario, if we get to X milestone, and if not. So we sort of plan it out in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess to ask you a question, because you brought up something that, especially to smaller companies, it can relate, is you mentioned someone can possibly even at times wear multiple hats.
Yeah.
I guess from your perspective, what are those roles that you've seen success where people can wear multiple hats? Because a lot of times someone might be really good at business dev, but they might not be good at retention, right? So what are those qualities that you say, hey, most likely these two functions could potentially be found in one person?
Sure.
Or have you seen anything like that?
Well, so you can do it, you can work into it that way, or you can say, I'm finding the right person who has the skill set to be broad, right? So it can go into it based on the person or the role. But I think somebody's got to be, like sales and marketing could go together, right? So, I mean, in my experience, sales and marketing, as long as they have support under them. So sometimes people have sales and marketing skill sets. Sometimes in my worlds that I've seen, marketing is the strategy and sales is the tactical. So sales can roll up under marketing. So I think you've got to have somebody in sales or revenue, like revenue generation. So I think like your revenue person, your sales person, your commercial person, your marketing, somehow there's some blending, I think, of probably those skill sets, assuming there's team under them. Now, maybe you find the right person who's a hybrid play, who spent part of their time in marketing and part of their time in sales, and they really can do it both. So I think part of it is what's the skill sets of the people coming to the table. But if you're trying to push it from the top down, I think revenue and sales can certainly go together. I think that go to market and marketing are probably things that could go together, right? I think that like there's those are probably the ones that seem most obvious to me.
Got it. Yeah, because that's what I've seen when it comes to early stage startups. Like, where do you take advantage of skills, and which ones should you be able to put under one person, since you're not able sometimes to bring an entire team. So I think I like that perspective and how you split it. So that's super insightful. And as we continue to think through this, and you coming from a background of healthcare, how have you built your sales team differently because of healthcare, which is a different industry, it has a different need? What has been some of the things that you've done around healthcare and building the team, and also how is that impacted by the different sales cycles and how things work around healthcare?
Yeah. So some years ago, we used to make blanket statements, and we say things like, you have to call on a customer 7 times before they buy. And I think over time, we got rid of that because we learned that it varies, right? So meaning it and COVID changed a lot of things, because how often you can access a customer influences how long a sales cycle can take, right? I think the other thing is customer engagement, like true engagement. And that might be dependent on how good the rep is, or how great your story is, your narrative, or how much your product touches the need of the customer. Those can influence engagement, which influence the cycle time of a buy. I would say your value proposition, how strong your value proposition is, influences buy time. And I would say customer type, right? So some customers and where they are sort of from a buyer, a consumer perspective, are a lot of early adopters, or a lot of specialty in our world that's very slow adopters, as an example, because they're not progressive, not progressive or whatnot. And then thinking about even the customer basket, what percent of them are early adopters versus what percent of them are slow adopters. So when we think about sales cycle, first of all, it varies depending on what part of healthcare that you're in. There's no longer sort of a rule. And I think that us knowing the answers to all of those things influence how we build a sales team, right? So when we build a sales team, we think about capacity of an individual sales rep. In order to think about capacity, you have to know how many target customers would there be? How often could you see the target customers? How much potential does each target customer have? And you put all these things into, you sort of calculate all these things to say, then how many customers could a rep have? And then you think about how many calls could they make in a day, and how many times could they see them in a month? And so when you do it all as sort of a math equation, it helps you back into what's the capacity that's needed to either touch the top 10% or touch the top 20%, things like this, if that makes sense. And I think and backing up even more so, we start with who are the 20% of the customers that make up 80% of the business, and you cut everything from that 20% of the customers, right? And then you say, let me understand all the dynamics, all the metrics of this person, and then say, what would it take? So we go bottoms up into what we need in terms of resources, by knowing what capacity is needed to service a certain group of customers with a certain group of opportunity, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think there's some quantitative data everybody can be using to help inform what size of team you would need, at least to get going.
And I guess that brings me to 2 quick questions for you. One is, because you talk about adoption, right? And so adoption a lot of the time has to do also with generations and it could be geography, regions. And so how do you tackle then if you're dealing with 2 different types of groups that are very opposite, and you don't have the leisure to build a big team? How do you think through that, or how have you been able to solve those sort of challenges? Just out of curiosity, because I think this is such a valid point, and how quickly the audience that you're talking to adopts it, or how quickly they are to make a decision. I think that's such a valid point.
Yeah. Okay. I think the most important thing is, and I'm going to go back to the first question you asked me, which was around what sort of the uniqueness of Salesforce's sort of thing, do's and don'ts. You've got to get data. And so as a founder, you might start as the first salesperson, but then you might have one or two more salespeople. People at small companies like to be free. And one of the things we need at small companies is data, because data is unique and data is a decision support. So if you can be collecting data on all the calls that they're making and the messages that they're sharing, that can help you more quickly than anything I can think of understand a sales cycle that's unique to you, right? Meaning, how many calls did it take to get to whatever milestone in the sales process? How many calls did it take to get to an actual sale? What message is, so this is, having a basic CRM. What message, you could even do a pull down, what message resonates with buyers that seem to buy more quickly? So there needs to be some collection of data, and not because you're tracking the salespeople, but because you're trying to get something to base your future decisions off of that would be that's substantiated, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most important thing that someone can do, is figure out, how do I collect data on what's happening to smartly inform how we go forward.
Got it.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think most founders that even start by themselves, they're doing this for they'll say, oh, it took me 3 months on average to get to da 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 da. But as you start adding 1 and 2 and 3 people, they care less about data, but you truly need that data to be able to make smart decisions.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And talking about data, that goes to the next thing that I was going to ask you, is metrics. Mm-hmm. And what are those key metrics? Because as this is the thing, you get data overload. You get all this data sometimes, and sometimes even founders find themselves overwhelmed with, what do I do? How do I break it down? What are the key things that I should be looking at? And to back up to a lot of the things that you brought up of how many calls, or what does success look like for the sales team that you're building? It would go back to, what are the key metrics? What are those metrics that they should be looking at? Yeah.
And again, I'm going to start it off the same way. Metrics are unique, right, to the business. But obviously there's always the financial metrics, which everybody knows. And I think everyone's thinking about, how do I grow my business? But at some point they might be asking people to invest in their business, and people have to be smart about just understanding their cash position, their burn rate, their run rate, the basic stuff, which I'm sure they're already doing. I think the next level, when you think about it's the performance of the business. So I think revenue is obviously important. I think revenue growth is important. There's so think about, how do I determine revenue and growth in the context of my business? So if I say growth, somebody might say that's customer acquisition, cost matters, or someone, so everyone's going to define this in a different way, but how do you define growth in the context of your business? I think that's an important metric. I think then just traction and growth. So again, you have to sit and define this for your business, but what could it be? Uptake of whatever customer type, right? Or depth or penetration of, what does that look like? It could be breadth or reach. What does that look like? Speed and momentum. I've seen founders all communicate this differently. So I think, again, it has to be customized to your business, but you have to have something that's in the category, I think, of traction and growth. You have to have something in the category of revenue and growth. You have to have your basic financial stuff. I think then how do you keep customers? So whether it's churn or retention, something like that, because you got to figure out how long can I keep them, or what else or to flag yourself. A lot of times you're doing metrics just to understand, how long am I going to get them? So then I know if I have to do something about it, right? So all of these are not just metrics some of them are metrics for internal purposes, meaning you're trying to track internal to understand, what do you need to edit in order to improve? Some of it's because you have to have it for external, because whether it's going to be an investor or they're going to care what really how that metric sounds, and if that's acceptable to them as an investor. So I think metrics are really used, and we'll talk about this with forecast, but it's like, these are the drivers of your business, and they help inform where are you off and where are you on, and where do you need to do something different in order to get a better result, right? I've seen people talk about customer lifetime value because they're thinking about the valuation of their business. So you probably need some metrics that help inform valuation, right? Because you're trying to say that this is a valuable business to someone else down the line. So I think that's important. I think markets, like market specific engagement metrics. So and one thing that I think is really important is like ROI metrics. So ROI for sales, ROI for marketing spend, ROI for marketing tactics. So you need to understand what works and what are you getting from your investment. Like, you're spending so much money on sales and marketing, tactics, people, programs, resources. You should be able to figure out what are you getting from those so that you know where to spend up and where to pull back, right? Because it helps you be smart with your money. But again, you have to define that in the context of your business. So I think a lot of it is sitting down and say, what metrics do we need to have internally that help us look at the key levers for our business so that we know what we need to tweak as we go ahead and track them, and what metrics are important externally if it's an investor or someone outside of our business that these things will matter to in making a decision to be, to form a relationship with our business. Those are some of the things I would say are important. Oh, are you saying? Okay.
And I guess to your point of the metrics and working backwards and figuring out, is there, I guess what again, going back to the fact that there's a lot of data that you get at the beginning when you're building your business.
Yeah.
Do you think, would it be a mistake if you have a lot more metrics that you're trying to track at the beginning and then start narrowing them down? Or would you say that shouldn't hurt you? Like, that should be, it's fine if you're starting off with a bigger amount of things that you're tracking and then narrowing it down. I'm just wondering your thoughts. Yeah. Or should you start actually smaller and a lot more tighter, and then depending on how the business is growing, how you're developing the product, then go broader? What's your thoughts on that?
My history is start broad and then figure out what's useless as you go down the line. Meaning, if you keep tracking metrics and reporting metrics, the problem is going back is hard, right? And it makes work for people. So it's almost easier to have a broader base and then be able to not miss anything. But going back and saying, oh, we didn't look at this and now we should go backwards, makes work for people. So what we've done is start broader, and then we go along and, we can talk about the frequency of reporting metrics, but as you go across time and you see metrics that people stop asking about or no one cares about, you drop them off because that's wasting capacity. The problem is you oftentimes don't know. I mean, metrics are flagging you as to what's working and what's not. And that's what will tell you if there's nothing there and you're tracking it and there's nothing there, then you realize, okay, I can drop that off. But if you miss it, and I've been in a situation where there was a key metric that we missed tracking early, and that got us behind. So I tend to say start broader and go narrower so that you don't miss a key business driver that can then have you be behind or off track.
That's actually a really good one.
Do you have an opinion on that or experience on that?
No, I actually, to your point, if you go broader, then you're not working backwards. But then I also sometimes have found that when they go so broad, they lose focus, and because they're small teams, then decisions take a long time.
That's fair.
Because but I've also seen the same thing that you're mentioning, which is they went too small on their metrics, and now they find out that the one thing that we're measuring, it's the one thing they needed. Now, how do you go back? And it all comes down to depending on how well you're collecting that data. If you're collecting it in a way that is easy to pull, but if you're having to pull it from 10 different systems and then clean it up and then put it in a nice presentable way, then to your point, it's capacity, right? It's
capacity. Yes. You know what I think is one other good way. I mean, I like what you're saying, Alex, is to sit down and make a list of everything. I mean, we did this, we sat down and made a list of everything, and then you sit as a cross-functional group and you talk yourselves into yes or no as a group. Because I think just having different perspectives, there's some people that are better about looking ahead and saying, that's going to be junk, we don't need that. Or because the team's always thinking about capacity, you're right. They're saying we can't do it all. But I don't think one person can make that decision. It's a cross-functional group that can sit there and think 360 and think forward around where can we take something off the list, because we can look ahead and know that that probably won't be high value. So I think if you can do that, that's a way that you could insert an efficient approach to not having to track everything.
Yeah, and I guess my other question, the other way that I've approached it, and I don't know if you've seen approach it this way, but it's almost, in the case of a startup, I always go back to what was the financial model, right? And see what were the things that we talked about.
That's right.
As, hey, if we do X, Y, Z, this should be the result. That's another approach that I've always
taken. That's why I say it goes back, it starts with the forecast, right? What are the assumptions in the forecast? At least you have to track the forecast drivers, right? But I think there's other things that aren't in the forecast that are like execution as an example. Like, so if you have a sales team, like execution's an example of something, or even spend might not be in the model. Like I've definitely had forecast models where marketing spend or incremental spend wasn't in there, execution of your team wasn't necessarily in there. So I think that there's things that sit outside of a forecast model that you need to be tracking as well to make sure that you, have your eye on all the things that can truly be, or many things that can be tracking the business.
Yeah, no, I love that insight. And before I keep going, any questions from in the audience, anything that you might want to ask? No? Okay. So moving as we continue to go, because now you have the metrics, and one of the things that metrics help you figure out is market fit. Like, how do you know you found market fit? And I'm just curious to know what's been from your experience and a signal that you've reached market fit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easy one is uptake trends and uptake and demand growth. I think another thing is customer feedback. And I don't know if people have the ability to, but market research. So what are people saying back to you in terms of market research? I mean, I think ultimately what tells you is, like if you're getting feedback in market research that your value proposition and your narrative and your customer wants and needs are like triangulating, and you were to kind of get feedback on what demand they expect to, or looking at what the demand ends up being actually. So even just small samples of customers, right? Surveys can tell you, are we hitting the spot, right? I think the other thing I can tell from when we listen to pitches sometime is the questions that you're asked, to me, tell you if your product market fit is there. Because if it's not clear, like if people are not, if it's not clear and people are confused and the types of questions are telling you that, then I think probably something's off. Like you're not hitting it where you need to hit it. But I would say demand and customer feedback are the easiest ones.
Mm-hmm. I wonder how, this is a question that I'm asking you because you're saying customer feedback. I wonder what's been the most successful way of gathering customer feedback that you found? Is it the survey at the end of a service? Is it being able to ask for real-time feedback? What have you seen has been a good way to capture that? Because I know a lot of early stage startups are always figuring out when do we plug in that tool or that process to get back that data.
Yeah. I've seen it done many ways. So on a limited budget, you can use, I'm forgetting the name of this, and I might have to follow up, but you can use, it's not SurveyMonkey, but it's something like SurveyMonkey where you can send it to customers. And it's like a pulse survey where you can do a quick 5 to 7 questions and get that back. And I think, someone's about the size of the survey. I think, there's even people at these places. I mean, they're very cheap. I think they charge you like $5 for each survey to do for folks, and they can tell you what's a good enough number. But yeah, I think having, I've been in spaces where it's bigger and we're always happy to have 30. So I think if you're in the smaller space, I think 10 to 15 is a great number to do quick samples. So I think little pulse surveys are a great way to touch out with customers. I think you can also do, if you wanted, we've done focus groups where we have administered market research, right? And I think the other thing you can use is surveys via like your field interaction. So if it's whoever's in front of the customer, or, doing things like that, where they do a quick pulse so they can even administer it so that it's free, right? Where it's 3 to 5 questions and you ask them to do it on the CRM and fill it out anonymously or whatnot. So I think there's a number of ways that you could do it just to get some quick feedback.
No, I was curious because I know that that's something that I've seen the back and forth. How do we do it? When do we do it? Is it annoying? Is it not? But it's so essential, right? To understanding, again, back to metrics and back to, is it a good market fit? So I was just curious to see what has been your experience. And going back to something we started off at the beginning, give us some insights to the whole commission structure. Like, what's been your most, I don't want to call it successful, but what's really worked or you've seen work across different roles that you've had as far as the right combination of sales commission, and how do you really structure that portion to keep the team incentivized, but also goes with the business plan or the strategy of the business?
Yeah. Okay. So the most important recommendation I can make here, because is don't be afraid, just like Alex, how people go get your team, you have expertise in different roles. Don't be afraid to get a sales ops consultant, because this is what they do. Like a whole part of their job is incentive compensation, and they can be efficient and bring their expertise. And that's who I always tap into my teams for this type of thing. If you don't feel equipped to do it yourself. I think some basic things are just understanding, when you're talking about compensating people, what's in your space, and like what % base and bonus do you want it to be? You sort of need to know that. So whether you pull that data from the ecosystem, right? There's probably publicly available data on Carta, or just if you Google, but you can understand what % base and bonus do I want it to be. The most important thing you got to start with is, what am I trying to accomplish with my brand, right? And am I in a new space, or am I in a untouched space? Because if you're in a space where there's already stuff, like, you might be able to set goals for people. If you're in an unknown space, you might go with commissions. So I think goals or commissions are two different things that someone has to think about, but it depends on how much data is available. Because sometimes, you have to watch budget, right? And so sometimes goals help you better manage budget, whereas commission can go crazy, because if you didn't know how to think about how far they might go, you can kind of blow the budget, and goals help you manage that. So I think you have to sort of think about goals or commission as a sort of baseline. I think also people just need to think about the goals of the IC plan of the incentive compensation. So it's like, is it to drive uptake? Are you trying to drive exponential, initial uptake, exponential uptake? Is it about pipeline development? Is it about, are they supposed to do one thing, or are they supposed to do multiple things? So I think you need to understand what are the components of that you're trying to drive through the person. Is it one thing or multiple things? And what are those things? That influences how you set up the incentive compensation plan. So I don't think incentive compensation isn't black and white or easy. You really have to be thinking through the different sort of things, because incentive compensation, getting it right, can go a long way towards motivation and engagement. And if you get it wrong, it can go really bad, really fast. and can affect turnover and retention and motivation. And so I think getting it right requires the right upfront work.
Sorry, do you see a place where or is this something that can happen where you start with a certain structure and then as the company's growing, you switch it? Is that something you've seen? Okay.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, if you think about COVID as an example and what was going on in COVID in healthcare, we were changing our IC plan every quarter because we were trying our very best to do what would be right and what would be fair and what would drive business in an environment where people stopped interacting with the healthcare system outside of emergencies. So it's like if you stop paying people, that was not going to be good for retention, right? Mm-hmm. How do you set goals when the landscape kept changing? You couldn't, right? So we had to stick with commission in that model. And then each quarter, because the way COVID was going up and down, which is also what happens in earlier businesses, it's not like they usually go like this. They're volatile, they're unpredictable. You're trying to get a trend and it takes you a while to get to a trend, and you need a trend. You need a trend in order to be really effective with IC. But trends are hard when it's early and you're trying to build a business. So we were having to change every 3 or 6 months just to make sure that we were, trying to be fair and motivating and timely with the dynamics of what was happening. There even got to a place where we said, we'll just pay you at target because you couldn't keep up with how much it was moving. So there might be times when you're brand new or you go through windows where you say, I can't even figure it out and I just got to keep the people and I got to get the work going, So yes, I think changing and evolving makes sense. Another time I've been in a therapeutic area where there was no history. It was a new therapeutic area. And so we used commission because you didn't have history or potential to set goals. But after we got to 1.5 years, we could switch to goals, which we wanted to, because that's a more controlled environment for being able to pay people and predictable environment. And so, but it took 1.5 years to get there. So yes, as your business evolves, your IC plan will evolve. I think ideally you don't keep moving it, but if the world is doing crazy things or your business is doing crazy things, the most important thing is, how do I have a motivating and inspirational plan in place so that people are engaged and they're chasing something that I need in order to accomplish my business goals?
Got it. No, that's super insightful, because I was just curious if that was a pattern or an opportunity where people can start with something but adjust. And
absolutely,
I think it's a great point. If the environment is changing, depending on the industry and what product you're offering, to have that flexibility so that you can keep. Now, I'm curious, how have sales team taken that when you switch in the middle of the year? Yeah. Are they receptive, or are they like, well, I was so focused on this and way of compensation. Now, how is that something that you've seen that people push back?
Yeah. So if you're flipping it and you're doing it to the favorable to protect them, people are they are pleased with that. If they feel disadvantaged, they're not pleased with that. So I think one of the things you're always looking at is, say you have 5 salespeople, you're looking at you always look at how will this affect the bottom performers? How will this affect the top performers? Yeah. Right. And so I think, and of course you always want to veer towards the protection of your top performers, right? Like, meaning you definitely don't want them looking at a plan and it feeling unfair to them. And you also don't want a plan where bottom performers just stay because it's bringing them money, but they're not doing what they need to do for your business, right? So I think we try to look at, if we're going to make a change, you don't try to make changes that are going to necessarily hurt people. We were doing it in the protection of trying to retain people, because remember, we had the great resignation going on. We had there was so much unpredictability in people's ability to impact business because the world shut down. So we were trying to do things that were more protection for people, but we also didn't want to overprotect people to have people hang on that were not highly valuable to the organization. So I do think you have to be careful. I think, when you're rolling out incentive compensation plans, you need to have advocacy. So I think the meeting before the meeting is really important, like having the high performers on board with the plan so they can say, I really like this, or I think this works because. I think some of that work can help you manage through the change in a supportive way. So I think you have to be so in tune, to your point, with the team in the macro environment and being really thoughtful about IC so that you don't get it wrong, because it can result in 30 to 50% of your team, as we saw in the Great Resignation, like turning over, and that's not good for anybody's business.
No, I completely agree, and I think it's a very important point. Getting buyout of the leadership, or at least the middle layer,
Yes.
so that they can then incentivize whoever's reported into them. And I think that's a very valid point. Getting that buy-in.
Yep.
Is key.
I think the other thing you can do that we did was you build scenarios in. So you say, if you do this, and you just do like the wild scenario, the middle scenario, so that they can see what's possible. Salespeople love to see what's possible, because if you have a financial goal, and let's say you've got to pay college tuition, or you've got to furnish your living, or like people are like, just tell me what I need to do to get there. Like, show me the scenario blown out. And that will have people chasing. So I think doing some of that sort of next level work as you roll out an incentive compensation plan can be highly motivating.
I like that. I actually like that a lot. No, actually, you made me think of someone that I'm working with right now. That's actually a good idea. If you do this and if you do that, and it makes it a little bit broader too, or being able to capture different opportunities.
Yeah.
And so, because we only have about 10 minutes, I want to ask you, building a pipeline is definitely the hardest thing. It takes a lot, different types of skills, from really good at building relationships, to identifying the target audience, to really thinking through how do you communicate, and back to a lot of other things that you also mentioned about how long do they take to really make those decisions, who are the decision makers, and all that. What would you say are some, make sure you do this, but make sure you don't do this, from your experience? Any like really strong points?
Yeah. Don't wait till you need to activate the pipeline to start thinking about the pipeline, right? So I think, we're talking a lot around who you need to get set up and how you do an IC plan. If that's important out the gate, then you've either got a resource where you have somebody that's a pipeline person separately than a salesperson, or you've got to set up the salesperson's IC plan so they equally give to the short term and the midterm. So really think about this up front so that somebody's accountable for it. I think that's really important. I've seen many times where people when you're trying to get started and build a business, you're like, I just need the numbers today. And then you get to that break where things slowed down and you didn't have the pipeline built up. So I think thinking about that up front and thinking about where you put it in terms of with whom is a really important thing. So do have a strategy, like from the beginning, related to people and your resources or the time. So even if you're saying, I'm going to have my sales rep do it and they're going to do 50-50, or they're going to do 40-60. So being specific around what part of the effort, time and effort, is supposed to go to pipeline, and then setting up your IC appropriately, right, for whomever on the pipeline piece, I think is important. Do have a penetration plan. So I know that there was one investor I'm thinking of that, we recently did an investment with, where they could say, here's the states I'm in now, here's the tier 2 states, here's the tier 3 states. So laying that out and understanding the financial opportunities. So I think some of that pre-planning on where you're going, not just willy-nilly, but where do I need to go? Because that's where I can show my next sort of bolus. Like what? So think about at the beginning, all investors are telling, or all founders are telling a story of, my business is going to grow like this. All right, well, then what do you have to do to get to the next point? And what do you have to do to get to the next point? And what do you have to do to get to the next point? And so what does that mean is who you have to target, right? And so this is where the targeting of accounts across time, right, across as you scale, and thoughtfulness around this, I think, is really important. So some work has to be done up front, as much work has to be done in that process as it is for like today's customers. And then I still go back to this point where I say, do establish good data, right, on activation so that you can forecast appropriately and resource appropriately for where you need to go and have appropriate expectations.
Where would you say, when they're building a pipeline, where would you say And I guess and I'm coming back to a few scenarios. Would you say that as they're trying to also figure out where is that pipeline coming from, like who's their target audience, are you proponent of really trying different methods, whether that is cold calling, going to networking events, talking to partners, right? I think sometimes founders forget that there's businesses that feed off each other. They could be partners that send you business and you send them business. What would you say? How creative should they get? Let's just call it, because that's very creative, coming up with all this places where you plug in and
Yes.
figure that out.
So I think piloting different approaches on the pipeline place is exactly, to me, that makes really good sense. But if you're going to do that, you got to be measuring the effectiveness of each of the different ways that you're trying to do that, because you want to be able to replicate where it's really effective. Otherwise, just doing that account by account is probably, it might be efficient at one account, but it's not efficient for your broader business. So I'd be looking to learn from a piloted approach, if that makes sense. Meaning, if we try this and it works, and what do we learn from how it works? Now, which accounts are like this that we can apply that 10 other times? So I think certainly we're all learning, right? As we're at the beginning of a business, we're all learning. But if you're going to do anything sort of outside of the box, seek to learn and replicate, right? So yeah.
I like that idea. I like that of the metrics when you're trying.
Mm-hmm. So you got to track it. I mean, it's going to be unique, but you've got to be able to track and understand and then find where you can do it again and again and again. Otherwise, it was just one account, and having everything be one-off is not efficient in a business where we know resources are challenging. But yeah, creativity, I think, is, unless you've got a set way to get from here all the way to there, creativity, I think, is important.
Yeah. And I guess as we're coming to an end, and any questions before I ask you to give us your final thoughts on what, as you have gone through so many different experiences, what has been that one constant, not factor, but opportunity or experience or lesson that you've carried with you that time after time has just really been really helpful to engage in any of the new ventures, any of the new products that you've taken on?
Yeah. So if someone was hiring me to do anything with sales, and if they told me I couldn't have a sales budget or a person to do sales operations, I would not be interested. Like I literally, you need somebody that's analytical and data oriented and operational that can help you smartly think about how I deploy, how I leverage resources, how I put in place IC, how I support, and how I evolve toward opportunities more effectively and smartly and strategically. Like if you don't have, you're trying to figure all that out yourself with no expertise, I think is not ideal. So if I could say one thing, I would say you can find there's even junior sales operations people that can be a great help to helping you strategically move your business.
Wow.
So yeah.
Okay. Well, any questions? No? Okay. Well, I do appreciate tremendously. Oh, and look, we have something on the chat. I didn't check the chat. I completely forgot to check.
Yeah, let me see. I think someone asked what was a good number in the sample survey. We have started with just 10 to 15. Is that enough, or do we need to invite more respondents? I think starting with 10 to 15 is great. Like I said, when I've done market research for, probably more, businesses that are more down the line. I mean, we started from $0 and went to a much higher number, but we always wanted 30 as our end, but we might've been dealing with bigger numbers. So I think starting with 10 to 15 is great. We were always satisfied if we had 30, and that was on, but I was dealing with this was at a point where we were at thousands of patients. So I think 10 to 15 is great. Someone asked, how do you deal with people on a commission-based plan who cannot even hit the KPIs? Well, the question is, why are they not hitting the KPIs? So I think you always have to back up and say, is this a person issue? Or is it an execution issue? Is it a skill issue? So some of that has to be explored. Are my KPIs right? And because if you're getting a lot of the team that's hitting the KPIs, but everything's at an individual level is off, I think you have to say, is it skill? Is it will? Is it capability? And do you have the right people on the boat, right? Somebody that's always missing, probably there's something there's probably some action that can be taken on the individual level, especially if you're seeing a group of people be able to hit KPIs and this one person totally consistently doesn't. Now, the one caveat I'll say is I've seen people be in individual markets, where their market is just so different, where their market is hard to access, everything moves slower, it's not progressive. So probably there's an opportunity to evaluate a little bit of the market as well. The other thing you could do is, tack on something else for them that has higher potential and see, can they do better with something with a little potential? Because if they can't, then you've probably got a person issue, right? But I think being cognizant of there could be a market issue if you have them somewhere too small and not progressive and whatnot. Those are some of the things I've experienced.
Those are actually really good questions. Any other questions? No? Well, awesome. No, thank you so much, Gwen, for your time. And this is recorded, so it will be going up. And again, thank you so much. If anybody wants to connect with Gwen, you can definitely reach out to she's independent or myself at my email. I'll put it on the chat. Perfect. Caroline, the recording will be emailed, so then you'll get it. And yeah, if you guys have any suggestions to other topics, please feel free to let us know. And again, thanks so much, Gwen, and have a wonderful week. And I look forward to seeing you in future events.
Thank you. Take care, guys.
Take care. Bye.